Hello, and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by FreeWilliam. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about a small group of bots for fun and profit. FreeWilliam says, recently a couple of interesting bits of GPT news came out, and a couple of clever projects were released. The first is ChatDev, which is a collection of bots filling roles in the development cycle, project management, testing, documentation, development, etc., to create programs that you or yet another bot ask for in regular text. So in other words, you type in that you want a program that will survey people and then detect trends in the survey or something, and you type those words in, and this program makes that entire thing. It project manages making that entire thing. It documents making that entire thing. It tests the program it made, and then it bug fixes it, presumably, while, making the body of the program. If I'm understanding correctly, that's what it does, that's powerful, depending on what the type of thing you can ask for in regular text is. Moving on. The second project, FreeWilliam continues, is from a paper that's been going around where a number of AI agents go about their days interacting with each other with a nifty bit of extra code to let them learn and grow. With one, you've got a small collection of virtual minions doing work that can eventually interact with the real world, making a program. With the other, you've got a larger set of agents that create new roles and find new tasks for the productive ones. I'm sure you could imagine ways to use a virtual civilization of dedicated minions/servants to do spectacular amounts of good and strange in the world. Okay, what comes to mind? I was a little worried there for a sec. Sure, I have a lot of opinions about this subject, but they're not going to be very technical. I'm a little out of my depth from a programming perspective. I am only a novice and aspiring programmer. I have programmed before, but I have close to the smallest amount of experience you can have while still having made programs before. So some of these things I'm a little out of my depth. I'm not sure if I'm confused about what ChatDev does as much as my brain is maybe just not fully believing or accepting that you can just type in, make me this entire program, and it will just do it. But I can imagine how you could make a program that did that. And so in theory, I guess that's what it does. It says that's what it does. I think it says that's what it does. And I can sort of imagine how current technology could produce something that did that. If you just connected it effectively, would basically be the hard part, I guess. And so I guess that's what it does. But be aware, I may say something in this parlay that is just wrong. This has never been a good series. I'm not a good person for highly technical facts. No individual is really a great source for that anyway, but this is a particularly, take it with a grain of salt, parlay, okay? Second, and this begins getting into the discussion, we are nearing a level of using these programs that feels like using artificial individuals. So I would like to briefly talk, and I think this is relevant, I hope it will feel relevant, about the term AI when it comes to these entities, the bots that we're talking about in this parlay. I propose that the term AI, artificial intelligence, for these technologies like this, is a misnomer. It's not really accurate in any way, and it comes from media, like advertising, basically. It might actually come from the people making the things, but I think they're knowingly using something that isn't really accurate. And I think the accuracy matters, not because I care about the strict definition. There isn't a strict definition for artificial intelligence, I would propose, that is actually useful. Not because I care about the definition, but because I think that calling it artificial intelligence is actually confusing about what is literally going on, which I think is useful. Even though I'm not an extreme technical expert on this subject, I do think we need to talk a little bit about what do they do? What are they? What are these programs? And there will be people watching this, listening to this parlay that know even less about this than I do. So I think that is useful. They are often, these ones are often called large language. I just forgot the third word. Anyway, large language model. Databases, basically just ways to look at a lot of alphanumeric characters interacting, prose or programming or whatever, a lot of sample data, and they can look through that And the program becomes very good at figuring out what correlates with what other alphanumeric characters for a given sort of category of prompt. So if you say, hey, can you write me an intro to my college essay or whatever, which is the first thing a lot of people thought of to do with ChatGPT, it will do it and it will do a good job, but it only did it by using one kind of programming blob. Again, I don't actually know if this is how this works, but this is just to give you an idea, that looks for college essay samples, and then another programming blob that figures out like how you write a college essay literally using statistics. You know, if the first letter is I, then what is the next character? A space, usually. Okay, and then what's the next character? And then it kind of makes a sort of average intro like that. Presumably it's occurring to me right now with some kind of entropy thing introduced, so it doesn't make the same thing every single time. Some inherent randomness or variance. And I would imagine it kind of checks over it somehow as well. But that could be as simple as a word processor, syntax editing, grammar edit thing. And so you can imagine, once you strip it down to its components, what is being done is not very complicated from a technical perspective. I think that this is important because it isn't similar to consciousness or intelligence really at all. And I think that's basically the whole point, is that what's useful about this level of these bot technologies is that they can automate incredibly tedious work, like just extremely tedious tasks. They're not necessarily good at anything that you would want a human for. I have snarkily proposed in the past that a good amount of the work that this technology displaces is work that I would argue it would be nice if people could have a living and not be jobless and not make the money they need to live without needing to do what is arguably pretty tedious work in some cases, and not having to do it for somebody who doesn't really care about the people doing it and just wants their idea to come to life. Letting those people make the idea exist without kind of roping in people that are just going to have to kind of grind away doing their whim seems good to me. It's only bad, I propose, because people don't just get the ability to live in the world. You don't get the right to just exist. You have to kind of finagle a way to earn the right to exist. And that is the problem, not automating things that are tedious. I feel like that should be obviously not bad when we frame it this way. But I want people who have jobs that are threatened by this, or who feel threatened, that's enough, to understand that I care about that, like I care about you having that work. It's something I worry about from time to time, though I think the thing I'm doing is extremely difficult and arguably pointless to replicate using technology. It's not really about goodness. So it would be very difficult and would accomplish little to make an artificial version of me as a content creator, if you want to use that term, which is what term they will use when they try to do this. But I don't think it will do much. Anyway, that out of the way, I also think it's an important premise because I don't feel that there's a sort of humanity in this topic. I don't think we need to worry about kind of violating the rights of the artificial intelligences because they're not artificial intelligences. They are very similar to machines. They are not close to something we would call intelligence or consciousness, most people. What is intelligence or consciousness? That's a tangent. I've got a little meter in my head that goes boop, 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 boop. That's a tangent. That one is for a different parlay. But my point is, though we might not be able to firmly grasp it, what we would argue is consciousness, I propose that current AI, these large language model chatbots, are not very close to that thing. So I don't feel there's really a need for that discussion here, or at the very least, it's a topic for another time. Okay, what do you actually do with them? I hope you can see how that feels related. I propose that the thing that they're useful for is automating stuff. When you have an idea, they let you do the kind of grinding through making the idea exist part without needing to make other people do that, basically. Also, it probably doesn't warrant having other people do that necessarily. This lets you approach making good things a way that would have been kind of inconvenient and impractical before, which is by experience. A really good way to gain experience with these things is by experiencing them. In a lot of fields, the valuable advice and breakthroughs come from, they're very simple once you know them, but they come from a ton of experience doing the thing, most of which wasn't actually useful, but because they just kind of had to eventually encounter the thing that could then be innovated on. You know, there's an extremely particular problem that is very simple, but it's not that simple to find the problem. It's simple to fix, but it's not simple to find. So kind of simulating going through the process of a thing is very valuable as a way to make better things. Rather than making a video game, for example, you could instead make a video game, a different video game, that is designed to have every version of the mechanics you are thinking about putting in your video game in it. Maybe it has them as challenge modes or something. Then play it and have other people play it. Or have a bunch of these bots play it, is where we're going. You should do that one. and look at it. Speed it up and look at it. What happens? You know, what are some pitfalls? What are things you built into this version of the system, but if you had known what it was going to be like in practice, you wouldn't have built that in. You would have set it up a different way. Then do that the next time. Now you can have your kind of first try at the actual one you want to be good be way better than a first try would normally be. You can kind of look before you leap a little bit with these ideas. That is the thing that excites me the most. You can do that without using chatbots, but it sure makes it a lot easier because basically the problem is you kind of have to do the work twice. You just get a lot more than 2 tries worth of experience if you make the first thing be something very specific. Kind of in this game example, it's sort of not a game, you know what I mean? You're kind of making like a program that lets you easily modify game mechanics, like easier than reprogramming the game, and then, you know, try them in real time. But that's sort of what you're making. A very sandboxy game, I guess. And that isn't going to be that like the game that you'll eventually make in most ways. You kind of need to just make some basic architecture. You need to do a lot of tedious things that don't really matter twice, but then you only have to be good the second time. So you can just say, hey, chatbots or chat dev, I'm imagining. You know, probably this is too much of an ask currently, but you can imagine being able in the near future to say, make me a basic 3D isometric camera open world. It doesn't have to like look good or whatever. Just make that exist and, you know, use object-oriented programming or whatever to make very distinct categories for the way the player moves and gravity and I don't know, like weather mechanics or something. So I can fiddle with those a lot really easily. You know, go out of your way to orient those as being very separate so I can fiddle with them. And I don't think that that's a particularly big ask from a programming perspective. That wouldn't be that hard to do if I just told you to go do it right now. Like, it would be annoying and tedious to do, and it wouldn't provide any value in and of itself. But if you could get that done without needing to get a bunch of other people to do it, it would be useful to do, don't you think? So that's an example. There are sort of steps in learning that would make something a lot better, potentially, and which don't require much actual ideating. Ideating? Is that a word? All words are made up. Ideating, I've heard that before. But which are probably prohibitive if you need to make humans do them, because you basically need to make a bunch of people make a game for no clear reason other than for you to scrap it and use the learning on a new game. You see what I mean? That doesn't seem fully respectful of those people's time. And it just doesn't need to have a layer of human polish. All the things a human would add just aren't useful in that game. You're making it for the express purpose of using your human learning yourself once it exists, so you can then bring that on to a further game. It's not really accurate to say it would be unvaluable in any way for a human to work on it, but I think you get the point. That's not a very efficient use of human resources, I would argue. And so having the ability to just do that and then you can learn from it, very powerful. If you can tell that I am interested in this as an approach, yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. For example, for me, making builds, thinking about games to make builds in, to have fun in this miserable existence that we exist in, to get a speck of dopamine scavenged from our time ravaged brains in this overly accelerated society that we live in, making there be a reason to live by creating fun entertainment. To me, it's really important to have fun games. And the games I find fun are, well, games usually with involved build systems. And there aren't a lot of games that focus on that a lot currently. So we're going to learn slow as an industry, and I'm going to die. And that's just not going to work for me. We're going to have to speed it up. The easiest way I can think of to speed it up is something like this. Basically making a game the purpose of which is to accelerate the process by which build systems get better in games. The game isn't really intended to be good in and of itself, though my immediate next idea is, okay, but if it could be, but then it also achieved that goal. This is another tangent, but you get the idea. Obviously very useful. For somebody other than me, I don't know, man, most people have extremely commodifiable work they want to do. It shouldn't be that difficult to think about how people other than this crazy dude can get value out of automatically making a program. I don't know, whatever boring statistics thing the business wants to do to raise its bottom line, you can have it be made with this. But then we get into the territory of displacing people's jobs, which is bad because they aren't just given money that lets them exist, which is how it is right now. But at the same time, I mean, if corporate wants you to make a stupid survey program that provides basically no value for pretty much marketing reasons so they can say they did it, it's kind of nice if humans don't have to force themselves to care about that. I don't know. Again, it's just not good that leaves people unemployed. That's bad. Okay, moving on to maybe the more exciting one, though I might come back to chat dev a little bit. The kind of small AI agents going about their day, their routine. This one I understand a little less, why the people who made it think it would be useful. It's less obviously useful, in my opinion, but I still think it's obviously useful for a similar reason to the one before, right? If you create an apartment complex, for example, having a bunch of little actors live in it and do stuff, and giving them a nifty bit of extra code, as FreeWilliam puts it, to let them learn and grow, because real people would not just take the same route every day if it was blocked or there was a lot of foot traffic. And then seeing where people go is useful. You could then make a better apartment complex. Just simulate it and let little chatbot versions of people run around in it for a while and see how they choose to optimize going in and out. For example, in my current apartment complex, these are apartments they're quite long. They're 5 floors tall, and they're quite hotel-like. They have a single hallway, a sort of lobby area on all 5 floors that has elevators, and then another single lobby. So they're like a sort of very long, almost line with only a little curve in the middle, right? And there are only doors that have, a lock, a security lock, in the middle, in the lobby on the first floor. But obviously there are fire escape doors at the ends of each of the 2 spokes or whatever you want to call them. So I think you can see where this is going. People use the fire escape doors a lot, a lot, way more than the primary door, to the point that the one near me is broken and people use it as a normal entrance, which is highly insecure, and I've complained to management about. They're normally good about this kind of thing. It's just an example. My point is that would have been obvious. I mean, it should have been obvious to anybody, basically, but you can see how watching a simulation of this apartment complex, it would have been obvious that would happen, even if you kind of simulated human reluctance to break what feels like a taboo. Some people will be slow to adopt using the fire escape, or they need more pressure to use the fire escape door because they're not supposed to. right? But after a certain threshold, they will start using it. Or if a ton of people start using it, they'll use it. And I think humans tend to overestimate this. What you would see if you simulated this environment with those parameters, I would imagine, is that one or two people would start using it, and then it would quickly accelerate to basically everybody. There are a few key actors that if you could magically get just those people to not use it, maybe nobody would ever use it. People wouldn't adopt it. But the moment those people have started using it, it's out of control. And unless you make it impossible to use, you can no longer stop basically everyone from using it. You can now remove the one or two instigators who were happy to use it because they don't care about no rules. And people will still use it all the time, of course. And that would be, I mean, that's obvious to me in this simplified example, but it would be very easy to see such a thing in a very complicated building layout, just as an example, if you could simulate it with a ton of little chatbot actors, like what this looks like. That's actually what the example FreeWilliam posted on the Discord. You can go into Parley prompts and take a look if you want. That's exactly what it looks like, which is why I use that example. So how about something a little further afield? Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of simulating things where people metagame, is would I guess be my summary. So one example is voting. If people can see how the vote would go if they do this, will they do something different the next time? I think for a lot of people, the sort of bridge between I do this action and here's the outcome, it has to be quite short, or they don't really register it as something that they did because they did that action. But if you give them a program that does do that, you type in who you're going to vote for, and out pops the candidate that wins if you type that in. I think for a lot of people, their brain clicks a little bit and they go, oh, me voting for this person is me deciding this person wins. And then if they try voting for someone else, they see, oh, this means this person wins. So even though I'm voting for this person, my experience is most people will stop being pedantic at that point and say, that doesn't matter. The practical impact of my action is this. Voting is just a random example. But you can think of lots of others. Things like people voting on legislation. Like what will be the result of... I was just watching this thing where... so it was about train cargo. And the idea is that a little while ago in human history, trucks became a big industry, and transporting freight by truck became more popular, which stole a little bit of the lunch from train, freight train cargo. I don't know why I can't say that in a coherent way. You get what I mean, train shipping. So shipping using trains was deregulated a little bit. The idea was to give trains more of a competitive advantage because having railway in a country is good. In and of itself, that isn't necessarily a bad idea. Again, in this oversimplified example, it's easy to see where this is going. That ends up being a Faustian bargain, where while it kind of made sense at the time, obviously it was going to lead to corruption and a loss of life, deregulated safety. And that's obvious, but again, a lot of political stuff, it's very difficult to see, especially from a layperson's perspective. What is the result of doing this thing? Like, is it even good for this to be legislated this way? What will happen in practice? And I would argue that a lot of political instruments, people, they are, I suppose, if in name only, are not very nuanced in the way they make decisions. They're going to robotically do the thing that agrees with their party, or like a switch, they will flip and do the thing that this block of voters wants, or whatever. It's not always that they'll do the same thing every time. A lot of politicians appear to be very two-faced, but it's just because they're consistently caring about something that isn't the thing they say they care about. I don't think that's particularly complicated. Hopefully that's not controversial. That should be obvious if you're at all into politics, which I'm kind of not. I propose that it would be kind of simple, maybe surprisingly simple, to fairly accurately simulate what would happen in practice if you hit this cue ball and then it bumps into that one, and then it bumps, that bump is fun, into that other one, and then it ricochets off the wall, and then it hits those two, and then that one goes in. And so even though you hit this one, that's the one that's going to go in. Do you want that? If you don't want that, don't pass this, no matter how intuitively it seems like it would be a good thing to pass, unless there's sufficient benefit up front that you're willing to weigh the cost, and now someone needs to make a tough call, which is what it would lead to. But I think that's better than like 360 no-scoping legislation. I don't know. Governance isn't where I expected this parlay to go, but that's a reasonable idea, don't you think? I don't know. So those are a few things. Just being able to learn faster by kind of making a purposefully bad but sort of broad version of a thing you intend to make before you make the release version to accelerate your learning, basically simulating the experience rather than going in to develop a program that's really complicated and chat dev can't make anyway. Immediately use ChatDev to make similar but simplified things and learn from that process rapidly first. If for some reason you, a complete novice programmer, needs to immediately make a program too complicated for ChatDev to make, I don't know, but maybe it could happen. Or you could just do that for fun and profit. And then the other one, what comes to mind is optimizing decision making. Like you can make it easier to plan something out that will, again, basically be good with less tries by simulating what agents will do in that system if they're able to learn and use nuanced reasoning enough like a human going about their daily life, making not very complicated decisions. You can make conclusions that before you have a gigantic concrete structure that will last forever, you can just make a decision to make it better, basically. There's good things about this building design, I guess. Probably something about the wind, like shearing past it. Anyway, that kind of thing. There are other things. I'm crazy, and so I really hate the acoustics of where this apartment building is. There's a forest right there, right out that window. And that's awesome. There's a trail like 15 seconds outside my door. A lot of leaves and plants and hills and a brook, a creek, help dampen noise from the highway, which is pretty close, but not enough because of the unique form of the geography. I believe what's happening is it's creating there's kind of a valley that's a little too close to kind of funneling the sound here, specifically right here, by the way, just this apartment. If you move like maybe 10 yards over that way or over this way, you can't hear it. But if you're just in this one apartment, perhaps my neighbors on this side, but probably nobody else, you can quite loudly hear some things on the highway. Like if a truck honks its horn or something at an exact stretch of the highway, you can hear it very clearly for just a moment and then it goes away, if that makes sense. But this would be rendered obvious if you could simulate that model. I guess then you make that doesn't really have to do with AI. But the point is, if you wanted to simulate a person hearing those sounds and where they would go or what they would do, how they'd lay out the room, or how they'd lay out their desk, like when I moved into this space, you can imagine how it's a big room, but when you get down to it, because there are 3 doors and my bed is like yay big and then my desk is a certain size, there are actually only about 2 different ways you can orient those things. And so in practice, a human will be putting their desk here. So it matters what it sounds like here. Simulating the sound isn't really in the purview of this technology, but figuring out where a human is going to be, and therefore where do you actually care about the sound quality. I'm crazy and care about this. I know most people don't, but it's just an example. It would be very helpful. I should have been able to predict that I would be sitting here when I moved here. And when I considered looking at this apartment, I should have stood here or squatted here and listened to what this sounds like specifically right here, because what it sounds like elsewhere in the room is irrelevant. I'm barely ever in any other parts of the room. I guess the bed. The air conditioning unit has a kind of resonating spot right where my head is. If you move your head like 1 foot, it's like 25 decibels less loud. For my own sanity, I got a decibel meter on my phone and moved it around to see. And again, you could kind of predict stuff like that you really wouldn't easily be able to predict otherwise using technology like this. Just have an agent live in the room and see where they sleep. And then if, again, this is a super contrived example now, but you can see how it would let you figure out things that normally it's hard to imagine how you would be able to know. In the defense of the apartment company, they have no idea that it's loud in any part of this room. You know what I mean? How would they know that? But if you're a human living here, you will predictably run into that problem. So it would be nice if they like just had a way to know that, and then they could have fixed it. Cool. I hope that was some ideas / demonstrated my inane interest in managing audio quality in a space, or like noise pollution. It became the noise pollution parlay for a second, but I care about that, so too bad. But yeah, it is an interesting idea. Again, the big thing I latched onto and tried to give examples of is the idea that it lets you learn faster. It lets you make decisions that may affect people for a very long time, from game dev to apartment complex design or whatever. It lets you make them with experience that you would normally only have gotten by having done the thing. It lets you kind of simulate the thing actually existing by more or less creating it digitally, and just doing that a few times to learn much quicker so that your first physical attempt is much better and we don't have to kind of live with that one. You can skip ahead to the good parts of human decision. Something I think about a lot in communication, as well as just like when coming up with ideas, is like kind of how many steps from the initial idea an idea is. I propose that a useful way to think about ideas is if something is only 1 or 2 steps from where you started, that is not a very unique or good idea in all likelihood. That's very easy to come up with. But as you increase the number of steps, it rapidly gets extremely uncommon for people to make that many steps. And thus 3 or 4 steps is surprisingly different in quality from 1 or 2 steps in an idea. For example, you can say my example before. I'm going to make a game with really involved build systems, and I'm going to make it real good, and it's going to be the best or whatever. Let's say that's step 1 or 0. Then you think, okay, like how? Well, I guess I could ask people or survey the market. Let's say that would be like step 1. You investigate, you make some decision about what kind of build system the game will have that in some way, in the most basic way possible, with publicly available information, correlates with something people might like. Make it a roguelike. I don't know. That's not being facetious. That's good, but just extremely obvious. You get the point. Like, obviously, that would be a thing that would do well right now. Step 1. And that idea isn't worth anything. It's so obvious, it would be kind of shocking if someone didn't have that idea. It's possible, but very rare, that somebody would ever get through development for a game and not have had step 1 or 2. Step 2 is perhaps something like, innovating on a game that existed before. Or, I liked this game. You as a developer just personally like this game and decide to iterate on it. You make a game pretty inspired by that game that borrows quite a lot, but it probably will be better in some ways. And there you go, step 2. But this is still pretty easy. I would argue in my model currently, most video games are step 2. They know about other games. Step 1 or 2, I guess, but step 2, they know about other games and have taken some learning from them, but as often as not, it's a pretty incomplete step 2, and they get a lot of things sort of step back or backwards from the original as well, or they include things for no real reason, which doesn't count as step 2 in my opinion. But I continue to propose, snarkily, that step 2 also is not very valuable. This is elementary. You could have a computer do these things if you wanted to. That's an idea. Anyway, step 3, though, once you go further than that, what is going further than that? Designing the development team in a different way, having an unorthodox development team. For example, I think that Supergiant made Hades, which is a game that is approaching a step 3, perhaps, and very good for a game without there's nothing super weird in Hades from a design perspective, but the way it was made, I propose, is why it is a cut above a lot of other games. It's because they just played it a lot more. They integrated playing it between humans much more and simulated what it was like if a bunch of humans played the game before the game was released, just like you could do with these tools. And that made the difference, I think. Basically just playtesting, but a level and a consistency of playtesting with informed and focused enough agents that you wouldn't get from merely playtesting a game. You would need, like, the developers after work every day played an hour of the game together and talked about it, and those are the people who can directly change the game. That is not the same as what most industry people call playtesting. I would love it if it was the same as playtesting, actually. But anyway, there are other companies that do that. But anyway, but then step 4, I mean, this is like creating something, a whole thing, the purpose of which is primarily or solely only to improve the thing after it. Suddenly you're cooking with gas. Very few people will do this, usually because it's resource intensive. But if you can do it, I would argue these ideas are almost automatically going to be successful because they're just so uncommon, and doing an involved process is effective. That is in and of itself valuable. I mean, it would be useful to do even if the product that came out wasn't effective. You'll just learn a lot from it. But again, the problem is that once you get to this level of involvement, you usually have to do so many things just to enable the existence of your product, if that's what it's going to be, that it's not practical for most people. In the case of Supergiant, the studio that made Hades, you could argue it's to some degree happenstance. We happen to have gotten a few developers that have an environment that allows for that type of development, but they didn't like found the development studio specifically to do that thing. You see what I mean? Like, exactly. Obviously, doing it with a few people only is kind of that. But if they were in this conversation, I think they would say, no, that's just like because we have the ability to do this. It's the natural thing to do, but we didn't like engineer this situation specifically. We just noticed it was possible with our resources and therefore did it. They started developing their Bastion, the first game by Supergiant, with the number of people they did, probably because that's the people they had, man. Not because they specifically wanted to engineer a superior development engine with like a certain medium critical mass of people that was still within people's, whatever that number is for the amount of people you can think of as people in your life. That isn't why Supergiant Studios was founded, I dare say. But it would be a good reason to found a development studio, just one that would require some convincing. Go ahead, go convince 10 of your friends to do that. If they say yes, which they won't, I promise you will make good games. If you make a studio like that, the games you make will be good. But as you're thinking about it, I'm right. You won't be able to convince enough people to do that to do it. So that's the rub. There's a kind of critical threshold where 2 or 3 steps, and I'm defining steps very loosely, where you kind of just can't get people to do that anymore after a certain point. But if you do, it becomes increasingly likely that you'll succeed. It's just become so unlikely that you'll get to start. And so using these tools to get to start could be useful because you may not need to convince other people. It could also be useful for something I don't really care about, but which is worth mentioning briefly, which is to provide proof of concept. You could possibly convince more people to join your weird think tank development studio that some nerd on the internet told you to make, if you simulate what that would be like using these tools first and demonstrate the benefit, like on paper. To me, if you asked me, it's obvious enough that it doesn't need to be demonstrated. Like that, it's obvious that would result in better development. I would be happy to spend several hours talking about why I think that's obvious. But we've already spent 40 minutes talking about it. So you don't need to convince me, but I think for a lot of people, it doesn't feel real. Basically anything other people haven't done before. When people aren't convinced by something, more or less every single time I successfully explain things to them, it involves appealing to the fact that people have done it before, or I've done it before in like some form, which is deeply frustrating to me because it basically means if other people haven't been able to do it, it doesn't matter if you could do it. People won't let you do it until someone just cheats and is able to do it first. And then people will go, oh, that guy did it, so now we can do it. These programs perhaps allow you to kind of break that balance a little bit, or cheat to having done that a little more easily the first time. And possibly they're adequate for doing it multiple times. Cool. That was fun. I liked this one. FreeWilliam with the AI or deep learning or large language model related parlays. This was a fun one. This is what was one of my favorites from you so far. Thanks very much for asking, folks. If you want parlay like this, you can get your own using a link in the description. It's got all the details about how to do that. FreeWilliam, thank you very much for your support. I had a good time with this one.